Today we're going to look at the ratification of the Constitution and what we are calling other key amendments. So we've already looked at the process of ratifying the Constitution. We've looked at the Bill of Rights that were included. Now these are some amendments that were added after the signing of the Constitution. So our goal for today is to explain the key rights that were added to the Constitution after its signing. So some of those key amendments. We begin with what are called the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They're called that because they were added during Reconstruction after the Civil War. So the first is the 13th Amendment, passed in 1865. You won't need to know the years of any of these, but just to give you an idea. The 13th Amendment was after the Civil War was over. What do we do with African Americans? The answer is we get rid of slavery. We decided that slavery is not a good thing and that we should do away with that in our country. So the 13th Amendment ends slavery official. The 14th Amendment answers a much more difficult question, and that is, what becomes of the former slaves? So we know that African Americans are no longer slaves after the 13th Amendment, but what are they? Are they citizens? Are they just here? What should we do with these people? And the 14th Amendment, passed in 1868, answers that question. It grants citizenship to all people born in the United States, including the African American slaves. So all those freed slaves, they are now officially American citizens. It also sets forth the process of gaining citizenship. So there are two ways, the law of the soil and the law of blood. First of all, the law of the soil means that if you were born on American soil, if you were born on American land, on American property, you automatically have American citizenship. Even if your parents are illegal immigrants, even if your parents are on the United States soil illegally, if you are born on American soil, you are automatically an American citizen because of law of the soil. The second way you can get citizenship is through what is known as law of the blood. And law of the blood means that if both of your parents are American citizens, even if you are born overseas, even if you are born in a foreign country, you are automatically an American. So if your parents happen to be visiting England and you were born, well, they were visiting England. If both parents are American, then you are automatically an American because of the law of the blood. If one of your parents is American and the other is not, you might still be eligible for citizenship, but that's a little bit more complicated. See an immigration lawyer for that. The other part of the 14th Amendment, which is equally as important as the citizenship clause, is the idea of due process and equal protection under the law. What that means is if you are accused of a crime in the United States, you are granted equal protection. All people, no matter who they are in the United States, the law applies equally to them. And so if we look at recent Supreme Court cases, like the gay marriage case, one of the things that it turns to is the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. Probably the most cited amendment in Supreme Court cases today is the 14th Amendment because of the Equal Protection Clause. Finally, so the last of our Reconstruction Amendments, we get the 15th Amendment. So first we have the 13th, which frees African Americans. The 14th gives African American citizenship, but then the 15th Amendment gives African American men the right to vote. And the key part of this is African American men. So at this point in time, I'm sorry, ladies, you still weren't given the right to vote. That doesn't come until after World War I. But African American men, or really anybody in America, if you are a man, you have the right to vote regardless of your race or color. Now that doesn't mean there aren't going to be stipulations on voting like poll taxes and literacy tests, but at least for now, the 15th Amendment says that African American men have the right to vote, as does anybody else regardless of their race or color. Next key amendment we're going to look at is the 17th Amendment of the Constitution. This comes about after the populist movement and progressive era in American history. If you remember back to the progressive era and the populist movement, we know that a lot of farmers in American history wanted more rights to the people, wanted more power to the people. They thought that the government was corrupt, and so they wanted to give some of the power back to the average ordinary people. So how do we do this? Well, originally back in the day, the way the Constitution is originally written, if you wanted to become a senator, you had to be appointed by the state legislature. So in the olden days, the state governments appointed the senators. And the people said, well, this isn't fair. We need to give more power to the people. So the 17th Amendment says that you now have the right to, you now have the right to elect your state senators. So while they were originally chosen by the state legislature, now people get to vote for senators, and that's how the Senate elections work today. The other part of the 17th Amendment is what happens if there is a vacancy. So if there's a vacancy, if somebody for whatever reason either dies or cannot fulfill their job or are injured to the point where they have to resign, if there is a vacancy in the Senate, it is up to the governor of the state to appoint somebody to serve in that place. Probably one of the more famous situations in which this happened was a few years ago when then Senator Barack Obama had to resign his seat in the Senate because he was going to become President Barack Obama. And so there was a vacancy left in his place. It was up to the governor of Chicago then to appoint his replacement. Unfortunately, you should never do what the governor of Illinois at the time did, Rob Blagojevich. Blagojevich decided that he was going to basically take bribes and take campaign contributions, and whoever gave them the most money, that's who he would appoint to fill President Obama's seat. That didn't work out so well for him. He is now sitting in a federal prison because you can't take bribes for something like that. But if you are the governor, you can appoint somebody. Next, we have the 19th Amendment in 1919. So this one finally gives women the right to vote after women served very valiantly during World War I, particularly serving on the home front by taking jobs in factories. Women finally, quote-unquote, proved to Americans that they were worthy of voting, and the President, Woodrow Wilson, decided, yeah, we should probably push for the 19th Amendment, and ladies, you finally get the right to vote. Sadly, it takes that long, but women finally get the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. So I've got a question for you. Would you pay $17 to vote in the next presidential election? And let's assume that you're old enough to do so, because I know some of you aren't old enough, but if you were, would you be willing to pay $17 to vote? Explain why or why not. Well, so here's the problem with voting back in the day. Back in the day, you used to have to pay to vote. That was called a poll tax. So you couldn't just go up and vote for free. So if you wanted to vote, you had to pay. So for example, the poll tax in one state in 1948 was $1.75. That's the equivalent of about $17 today. That's why I gave you that number. And so if you wanted to vote in the state of Texas, you'd have to pay that $17 in order to vote. So the kicker is that fair? Should you have to vote? And one of the things that poor people said is no. If we can't afford to vote, why should we have to pay? Now, this also creates an unfortunate situation because many of you said it's not worth your time to vote. It's not worth your money to vote. Your vote doesn't matter. Well, when people take that point of view, the government generally tends to not do much to help poor people and to help people who don't vote. And so it's a circular process where you're poor because the government doesn't put anything in place to help you, but you don't get any help because you don't vote because you can't afford to vote, and, well, you get the idea. So finally, in 1962, we get the 24th Amendment, which puts an end to the poll tax. So you no longer have to pay to vote. There's also other things around that time that put an end to the literacy test, which means you don't have to pass tests in order to vote. More on that later. But these are just a few of the key amendments that we're going to go over. Obviously, there are 27 amendments to the Constitution. You don't need them to know them all. But these are some of the significant ones involving the rights of American citizens. Have a wonderful day.